This hallway is inside a shopping centre in the very heart of my hometown, Melbourne, Australia. I love this city. I love the Yarra Bridge and the view it offers at any time of day in any weather. I love the hill behind Federation Square. I love Little Collins Street, my favourite cafe is there. I have the immense privilege of working in the city and getting to interact with its people almost every day. And I try to be very grateful for that. I grew up here, and while life is life and is not always sunshine, this is my home. And with my home comes a great comfort. But this hallway, there is not another place in the world in which I have stood that I hate quite as much. It feels totally detached from reality and built to encroach on my personal space because for some reason I don't quite understand. There is nothing I loathe with the same primal ferocity as advertising. These screens are too large. These posters serve to impose by way of their size before they attempt to appeal. It's honestly intimidating. Something about the openness of the floor. And the only thing I control in this hallway is where I point my eyes. I always try to look straight ahead at the escalators. I just want to get to work. Where I point my eyes doesn't give me power though, it gives me paranoia. It gives me temporary security from something I know that I cannot escape. And even though I may look away, I've always been sure that in many ways my aversion to certain things is an admission of its effect. By covering my eyes, by cowering, I'm saying that it affects me. It is above me in that sense. Because it feels so passionless and disconnected. Painstaking depths plunged to by talented people, no doubt, trying to capture the right kind of glint in someone's eye, and the right angle from which to present this isolated scenario, as if it alone is enough to hold interest and everlasting artistic weight, regardless of what it means or what it stands for. And these ads may not be for me, but I still have to see them. Advertising is the world's most dominant form of art, most inescapable form of art, and yet I still try to run, and there is no acknowledgement paid to the other ad sitting right next to it, and the one next to that, and the monster that they form as a collage. There seems to be no oversight to the medium of advertising as a whole, or any examination of the long-term effects that constant exposure to so many clashing sources of it may produce in an individual. I'm not able to link them all together and understand it as one gigantic force. Instead, it feels threatening, an endless barrage when packed into a single hallway. I want the city that I came for. I know it's here somewhere, hidden beneath this exploitative commercial exterior. And I know what you're thinking, because it's the same thing I've been asking myself for a long time. When is this guy gonna start talking about Tomb Raider? I've been making videos about video games for 7 years on and off, and the same question has been hanging over my head for nearly all of that time. When am I going to talk about Tomb Raider? Video games don't owe me anything. I had been trying for a very, very long time to view the medium as opportunities created by others for me to express myself. They need to be perfect so I can feel good, so I can be who I want. Like I said, that's not how I would like to think anymore. It's not how I want to view video games, and it's not how I want to view myself. I don't want to be desperate. I don't want to rely on other creative people to provide me the virtual opportunity to feel good about who I am. I don't know what I would do if someone approached me and told me my music needed to change so they could feel more expressly targeted by my lyrics, or to alter the tonality of the instruments into something they prefer. As a creative, I would find that idea offensive and preposterous. It's because there's a huge difference between a professional opinion from someone trying to help me improve my music and someone who just doesn't like it and should leave me alone. The difference is whether I asked for their help. I want to feel about video games the way I feel about music and film. To know there are individuals who made the thing, and that what I think of it, positive or negative, is nowhere near as important as their own satisfaction in what they have created. But Tomb Raider is the ultimate challenge to this idea, to nearly any idea I've ever had about video games. For this reason, I would say Tomb Raider has been formative in my life. It's as huge a part of my approach to video games as almost any other title has been. Because I despise Tomb Raider with a ferocity unlike anything I feel toward any other piece of media I can think of, and I need to know how to deal with that. It's a totally unreasonable and irrational feeling when considered, but it is there and it has not disappeared since I first played the game in its year of release, 2013. Tomb Raider is the only game which inspires me to hate myself because I have played it. The experience of disliking a game, however, has and will continue to teach me a lot. About myself, that is. Because while it's been 5 years of me trying to figure out the exactness of the vendetta I have against Tomb Raider, I've known the answer to it all along. I've just been too scared to say it aloud. I would say I'm kind of embarrassed by what's caused it, really. There are two answers I can give to the question of, why do I hate this? One of them is an attempt to save face, to offer my emotional reaction as more than it is. And the second is an honest, open, and unguarded confession. Why do I hate Tomb Raider? I'll answer this in two ways. Tomb Raider is a 2013 video game developed by Crystal Dynamics, acting as a reboot and retooling of the iconic franchise. Tomb Raider was directed by the trio of Noah Hughes, Daniel Chaya, and Daniel Neuberger, and was written by Rihanna Pratchett and Susan O'Connor. The lead role of Lara Croft was played by Camilla Luddington. There will be spoilers. Obviously, Tomb Raider is a very long-running and very well-known franchise, showcasing the escapades of English archaeologist Lara Croft. The series has released just under 20 titles across various platforms in the years since 1996, when the first game was released. There have been 3 live-action film adaptations, 2 starring Angelina Jolie and inspired by the more original take on the character, and a more recent version starring Alicia Vikander in a film inspired directly by the recent reboots. I have not seen any of them. I have not played any Tomb Raider games released prior to the reboot. I do not plan for that to change. The Tomb Raider franchise's various titles have sold over 63 million copies worldwide, with Lara Croft herself easily one of the most recognizable video game protagonists in the medium's history, regardless of the quality of the games in which she stars. Her history as one of gaming's foremost female stars and status as a sex symbol has its fair share of controversy. I won't be talking about this. After the commercial failure of Tomb Raider: The Angel of Darkness, development of the series was handed from creating developer Core Design to American developer Crystal Dynamics. After a few titles following in the vein of the original games, a decision was made to reboot the franchise anew, redesigning Lara Croft and the series elements for a new audience, updated stylistic choice, and starting from her origin story as a 21-year-old naive archaeology student before her rise to field dominance. Tomb Raider tells her origin story, stranded with an archaeological crew on the mysterious island of Yamatai. Lara must learn to survive in the wilderness using all her training and skills and to outrun a malevolent cult who has taken over the island in the name of an ancient, powerful Sun Queen. Tomb Raider is a third-person stealth shooter hybrid with some climbing and physics-based puzzle elements. Its combat employs the use of a bow and arrow, firearms, and melee attacks, with the 4 staple weapons upgradable by crafting. There are skill trees to improve player abilities, as well as various collectibles and optional puzzles scattered within its semi-open hubs. The open areas of Tomb Raider are tantalizing in their potential. They hint of Mario and Metroid, where the player finds hidden objects in a playground and also uses tools they gain later to progress into new areas and tombs. There are multiple paths to the same objective. It has an interesting use of verticality, and the buildings and structures within them have an intelligent use of wear and tear. They appear to have been here for a long time, and even though in story context that doesn't really make very much sense, it looks cool. Tomb Raider is on paper a semi-linear world. In practice, I think there were a handful of larger environments first built as concepts, which were later then given linear bridges. And Lara controls exceptionally well throughout everything. There's a noticeably slight input lag, which greatly contributes to her feeling of weight and motion. She feels full of mood and unsteadiness, whilst I always stayed confident and in command. It's difficult to explain in exact terms, but Lara feels like she's moving through the air, not just at my prompt, similar to how Horizon Zero Dawn feels to play. Her jump is of particular interest to me. She has a fair bit of hang time, and her trajectory can be changed mid-air, but the animation makes every jump feel like a close call, but you stay confident in your ability to land because you're in the air for so long. Lara's wall and rope climbing combined with simple jumping puzzles helps the movement stay fresh. She feels dynamic with every movement, like she's doing exactly what you say, although there is some frustrating slowdown for loading, I assume, when entering certain secret tombs. This is topped off by a fantastic auto cover system, which is perfectly suitable for stealth and shootouts. Speaking of the guns, the angle fights are presented with can become quite annoying and claustrophobic up close, but at range it's all fine. The guns still control well and feel very different to each other, like the impacts of bullets and arrows varies depending on what weapon one is using, and it helps lend a sense of variety to the combat, which is kinetic and strategic simultaneously. Not much else to say really, the guns are fine. In terms of environmental design on a whole, the game uses paint and coloration to signify the areas on which Lara can climb, which feels convenient inside these risky scenarios. It's an environmental shorthand used to guide the player, a highlight of white here or there, and used in other video games most often to separate the climbing from the world by eliminating the player's need to actually observe the world in order to understand it. Tomb Raider also employs collectibles and scavenging, which, combined with the highlighting, encourages players to look for things inside the world and not at the world itself. You're not looking at the environment, you're looking for the highlight. You're looking for the next box of spare parts. It's a compromise that need not be there if the game simply constructed its environments in ways that are easier to read in the first place, or you can cut a corner by painting a ledge. If you can find any painted ledges in an Assassin's Creed game, let me know. The worlds were built with the climbing in mind, and that informs how the player looks at the world as their character, trying to find the fastest path up a building, which looks ordinary but was indeed built by designers for the express purpose of climbing it. It's a world choice and always was. In Tomb Raider, the environments can get away with being undersized or unclear if highlighting is there. There doesn't need to be a great deal of detail because the player isn't actually trying to read their path as they would in a real forest. They're being told exactly where to go and what to do by a visual shorthand, so they're only looking for those indications of their path. It's inelegant at best, and usually best contextualized through character ability rather than world reality. This culminates at the end of the game in a climbing section which is visually impressive but totally fails to convey the danger of the situation because it feels so safe. This is a problem with most of the set pieces in that they don't actually test the player's ability because of the visual assurance of the path one is meant to take. The game is definitely on the easy side throughout, and this doesn't help increase engagement. Ideally, a set piece should grab your attention, but Tomb Raider was released at a time where the trend seems to be crafting set pieces through being different to the game's ordinary parts, not through any test of skill or gameplay variety or any combination of previously learned skills. For a game specifically concerned with survival, it's surprising that there are no systems in place to support that theme. There's no stamina or hunger bars, fatigue meters, camouflage, anything. The game can't really expect the player to feel like they're on their last legs and need to survive unless it actually pushes them with some kind of factor that they must fight against. There is no such stress in Tomb Raider. The best that's here is combat. And from a purely mechanics standpoint, this is definitely the worst offense in the entire game. One of the very first things that comes to mind for me about Tomb Raider was its gameplay camera. Take a look, first of all, at the amount of camera shake when Lara is just walking around. Just walking around. Now, fairly often, games will introduce camera shake during sprinting animations or while using weapons to convey a sense of weight. This is best reserved for moments of effect so as not to squander the impression or allow the player to become used to that intensity before it's truly needed. Think of the Leviathan axe. It's so satisfying to throw every single time, and the camera shake really helps this, but the gameplay camera itself is extremely steady. But Tomb Raider employs a heavy use of camera shake at almost all times, so the effect of weight and impact doesn't really appear to be what it's going for. What a constant amount of camera shake implies is a human-operated camera, that there's someone holding the thing while it shoots video. I am simplifying, but this is most often what this kind of cinematography conveys, or at the very, very least, to insert some kind of human emotion to the viewpoint. This is reiterated by the game sometimes using camcorder footage during expository scenes, and most of them are shot very similarly to the ordinary scenes, just with even less elegant character blocking and an unreasonable amount of fingerprint marks on the screen, which leads me to the lens effects. What is a lens effect? At its best, it can be used to help give give the player a very accurate sense of what the character themselves is seeing, like getting the sun in your eyes and being unable to see during a particular firefight, putting you at a disadvantage, or covering the screen in snowflakes in the middle of a blizzard to give a sense of low visibility. Sometimes while these effects have been used, I've rubbed my own eyes to clear them before remembering that it's just on the screen. It's unnerving when it works, but there's a subtlety to it. Combined with the camera shake, the amount of lens effects Tomb Raider employs doesn't often appear to be there for this kind of specific purpose, except maybe as an indicator of recharging health. It doesn't really match what Lara is seeing, it's used exclusively for photographical effect, for style. Like, the form the effects take is that of rain on a camera lens, not rain on a pair of eyes. There's also the use of, like, weird QuickTime indicators which take the same form as the user interface and kind of integrate themselves to the world. Choosing to display the QuickTime prompts, which is a gameplay function, in the same fashion as the user interface feels like the menu is at use inside the game world. It blurs the line as to where the non-diegetic begins and where the world of the game ends. And on top of that, menus and reward indicators constantly cover the screen, sometimes at the most ridiculous times. They work to kill tension more than anything. So you've got three factors in presentation. You've got camera shake, lens effects, and an overbearance of the menu into the gameplay. Tomb Raider, therefore, constantly feels aware that it's a game and constantly caters itself to be for external audience gaze. This conveys a human operator to the camera, an unshakable sense of irreality, and a deliberate nature to the way this is all framed that never gives the game a chance to feel real, only like a cardboard set being shown at exactly the right angles. In other words, there is an actual lens between the player and the game, because the presentation treats the player as if they are looking through the screen at the world, not into the world from within it. While this is not a problem in and of itself, it becomes a problem if the game was hoping to give the player a sense of identification with her as a character, and it is a problem if that doesn't feel like an intentional choice to separate the player from the game. It's even more interesting to observe that the cutscene director for Tomb Raider 13 was Cory Barlog, the director of God of War PS4, a game whose presentation was as effective as it was wildly overblown. Despite Barlog being the director, Tomb Raider is quite different from God of War's anime-esque framing and smooth transitions in cutscenes. However, it focuses in on camera shake even more extreme than the gameplay camera does for no discernible reason. Even during moments of levity, and it's really hard to understand why this is going on. There seems to be little attention paid to what each shot conveys as a shot. It's really unsteady that conveys something, but it doesn't seem to know what. For this reason, while Tomb Raider may be considered as a quote-unquote cinematic game because of its commitment to its shaky, gungy 28 Days Later-esque presentation style, it's hardly a success for it. Commitment isn't enough. It needs to know why it's shot this way at every moment and feel somewhat considered in order to be effective as a stylistic choice and not merely memorable as an aesthetic. So going back to the gameplay here for a moment, I mentioned how Lara controls unsteadily and how the firing methods give a great sense of impact to everything she does. The way Lara handles does a great job of putting me in her shoes. I'm doing my best to get over the ground in between cover. The jump is forgiving and satisfying so as not to frustrate the player's progression, and the dynamic animations seem to provide her movements with mood. She feels fragile but capable. So the gameplay does a great job of putting me into Lara's shoes because it's easy and satisfying to control, but I don't really feel like Lara because my vision is not hers. So in short, Tomb Raider is enjoyable to play insofar as Lara controls well. Moving her around, using the weapons, running the game's gamut as Lara is good enough for the game to rush the other parts of the world and enemy design whilst mostly getting away with it. This scene is from a film which was made in 1994, a film directed by Robert Zemeckis and titled Forrest Gump. It is perhaps the most clean use of implication as a tool for storytelling gravitas that I can point to in a visual medium. It is one part in a dense film filled with beautiful moments, so many beautiful moments that at times the film can feel overfilled. But it rarely ever plays these moments incorrectly. Most every one of them connects to another and holds some greater meaning within the message of the story. There is often an acceptance of quiet, particularly in this scene, and a respect to the meaning of the actors' performances, and the silence which returns Jenny's outburst is felt by the audience as it is by the characters. It's gripping to see and understand what Jenny is trying to express here without a single word being spoken. There are two essential things that make this scene what it is, and in creating a moment like this in a story which hopes to hold meaning, these two essential things must be included. The first is that the piece must embrace stillness. It has to wait.
Jenny! It was the happiest moment of my life.
You cut the shot too soon and the tension is gone. Say something aloud and the tension is gone. Maintain the tension through delicacy. This takes faith on part of the crew and the audience to convey meaning in a way that people can truly empathize with and truly understand. You kind of got to let the moment breathe. It has to feel real. It has to be vulnerable. And the second essential element that makes this scene really work is quite simple, but so very, very hard for modern AAA video games to understand and achieve. To create beautiful moments which lift your work higher like this scene does, you have to mean it. You have to build your work around something, if not important or crucial for you to say, something you can at least put a convincing level of passion into seeing brought to light, and brought to light well. Video games have a harder time of this for several reasons, most significant of which is somewhat overlooked, I feel. When a film studio decides to greenlight and make Forrest Gump or any film as significant as it, they do their best to make sure that they hand the film to a carefully curated team of experienced and passionate professionals who have worked on all sorts of other teams as well. These are people that they know will create a fine film from the material based on their previous work, their resumes, their experience, their passion for that project. Sometimes it's the other way around. A filmmaker will pitch an idea to a studio or approach them, and they'll greenlight it if they have faith in the filmmaker. Now, video game studios don't have stuff like Robert Zemeckis, Tom Hanks, Robin Wright going from film to film for specific projects, carefully selecting the work that they want to do. You have financially viable IPs being handed to development studios to keep forever, whether the individuals who work there are capable or indeed interested in producing the best version of it that they can. So when your animator works on your 3D game, it's not someone who signed up to make that particular game, it's just someone who happens to work at the studio. Sometimes you get lucky and you pair Batman with Rocksteady. Other times you make mistakes and you give the Tomb Raider franchise to Crystal Dynamics. Perhaps it'll be too late to realize that while the IP is quite well known, there is no feeling associated with it in the public consciousness, or any particular inspiration for the studio you've given it to work with. So when I play this game, I see a bunch of isolated moments which are very well built and presented, but I don't see choices which take faith or patience on behalf of anyone involved, including the audience. I don't see Lara grieving or in shock or horror at just having taken a human life and having a moment to herself. I see and hear lip service. I see and hear her screaming, "Oh God," out loud because we can't possibly infer her shock through visual cues and force her to carry it with her later. The sad music has to play really loud to make sure that I understand that there's sad in the scene. I see and hear an abandonment of the dramatic weight of this moment and this potential entire emotional arc within actual visible seconds. You can see the exact moment where the game stops caring about wanting this moment to mean anything at all. And on top of that, you receive EXP and a handgun upgrade as soon as this happens. Why is this here?
Oh God!
So just as an aside, I am just about done with video game storytelling in AAA games, because it's really annoying. I'm annoyed that we have to make concessions to the stories to make room for objectives and gameplay and all this other junk because we're tied to the way we built games when we weren't trying to tell stories at the same time. Something has to be the priority. But AAA has been consistently attempting to balance between storytelling and traditional game construction with like skill trees and stuff for years. It almost never works. Commit to something. Commit to telling the story or making the game in a certain way. I should not be able to see where one ends and the other begins. I know it's hard, but I am tired of praising video game stories that were functional as good, because that's not the same thing. We don't get proper good stories in video games yet. We get stories that work in spite of them being told in video games. We get stories that are surprisingly fair. But Forrest Gump is just one of legions of films at its level of quality. Nearly every film I see these days is really excellent at something. I have not played every video game, but I have also not seen every film, and by my count there are 4 genuinely good stories that a video game told, and told well. 4. And I think it's because we're all bogged down in what interactivity has to do with it. I am tired of pretending that interactivity saves video games from doing basic shit like this wrong. If video games are solely about interactivity and not about proper storytelling techniques, explain to me why a DVD menu is not classified as one. We did not reinvent the wheel. The guidelines to good storytelling do not suddenly change when interactivity is introduced, and I am not interested in receiving an interactive window into a story unless that story is already good. Screw settling for less. I am gonna tear this thing to shreds. Tomb Raider features extremely heavy subject matter. It uses the implication of sexual violence, and it offers thoughts on the sanctity of human life through strong religious and patriarchal overtones. There are strong themes of survival against the odds, human sacrifice, extended moments of character death, ideas of ancient Asian cultures and intertwining that with the Second World War, and enough implied violence to overfill a horror game on top of the amount of on-screen violence in which the player is involved. It features a young, attractive female avatar as the central protagonist and features an army of white men as her oppressors, which says something on its own. So it has this kind of content, and it introduces itself as a grim, serious, and gritty story. Over the top maybe, but it's dark and it's framing the world in a very grounded, scary way. To me, it's kind of in the same vein as the film District 9. It's a completely over-the-top premise, aliens being kept within quarantine in South Africa, but it's framed with nastiness and gunge, and thusly can be seen as allegory for real-world topics, asylum seekers and refugee issues, and pack genuine emotional weight despite its high concept because of this. The high concept is just a way to make a very real topic more commercially appealing, among other things. So Tomb Raider is not a laugh and have fun kind of video game, because the main character doesn't crack jokes, she wails and screams in pain. game frames itself like a drama from the very beginning, and this informs how the audience is asked to approach the story. And the game fills itself with enough actual meaty themes to have the player believe it packs an emotional punch. It sets up these rules and expectations, features its heavy and important story subject matter, and does enough of a disservice in handling them, not only to squander the opportunity to provide meaning to players, but badly enough to harm them and trivialize these issues. I'm unwilling to grant points to the game as entertainment because it is not framed as entertainment. I don't try to criticize Uncharted for its level of violence because the game never draws attention to it with a moody score, or has its main character reminisce about what terrible things he's done, or even have that much blood in it really. He makes a joke. That's entertainment, and it deserves to be treated with that mindset. That's how the devs are expressing their story. But Tomb Raider wrote an entertaining story with conventional mechanics built for a good time and presents it like it's extremely serious. And how it's presented is how I'm going to see it. Paradoxically to its extremely well-established and sustained tone, Tomb Raider's narrative is one of the least full, least compelling, and most frustratingly rushed you're likely to find in the medium. It feels unfinished, like a list of the first thing everyone could think of, sitting in a line, loosely connecting set pieces which were designed and programmed months earlier with little to no forethought given as to how one would connect them. It's packed way too full of characters and not full enough with honesty, has no concept of pacing, doesn't understand its protagonist in either narrative or gameplay capacities, and fails to follow through with any of its established themes despite having every opportunity to do so, and often after setting them up quite well. In all honesty, Tomb Raider would not be worth criticizing like this if it didn't through and through prove it had the potential to be quite good. If you know me, you're probably aware that I don't like to spend a lot of time on plot holes. They're dead ends of conversation which only act as evidence for conclusions that I've already come to about the actual quality of the story and the storytelling in the video game, and they're usually fairly surface level as it is. The conclusion here is that there is so little worth in both the tale and in the way that it is told, that under any other circumstance, I wouldn't devote a single thought to the story in this game. The plot holes in Tomb Raider, however, are so asinine, unnecessary, and obvious that you, the player, are left to choose if it's a borderline insulting way of telling a story, or if the game actually gives up halfway through. Simple things like Lara wouldn't shoot the roof to stop pursuers, or I can land this shot on the main villain right now, happens so persistently that it's not worth spending time dissecting. There's more hole than plot. It's using a fishing net as a duvet. It's clearly extremely rushed, and Rihanna Pratchett, the lead writer, definitely had her work cut out for her when the designers gave her a superhuman as the main character, skill trees for combat, a tone this dark, and asked her to have it make sense as an origin story of an inexperienced adventurer. Kind of doomed from the beginning. As an origin story or as a new start for Lara Croft, I can't seem to find any trace of conviction in actually setting her up. I'll get to this more a little later, but suffice it to say the game is already aware that the Tomb Raider IP is ubiquitous and doesn't feel like it's trying to prove what makes it great. Is it even a great series, or do we just know what it's called? Moving on from that, the tone is still there, however, a tone of darkness and violence which well and truly outgrows any narrative justification for itself. The story is extremely dull, but it's wrapped in a wonderfully realized atmosphere in this way, and it kind of produces a very off-putting sheen to the game, which... It's difficult to find examples where the workable plot, themes, or character come into the game world or actions much at all. That is to say, not much the player does has much to do with the story. It is operating separate from their actions and goals to a surprisingly whole degree. They're almost in different worlds. Tomb Raider has a very, very big problem with objectives. Most of the time it will use its own uninteresting, non-fleshed out cast of characters as MacGuffins, people Lara needs to save, and send her on her way to get them before it throws some explosive action into the journey in between. And on top of having to rescue a lot of people, the team also can't escape from the island because of the magic of the Sun Queen destroying any transport that comes or goes from the island. But besides that, Lara can't manage to find all of her friends at once because at least one of them needs rescuing at any given time, usually more than one. So she's constantly chasing a carrot on a stick, whether it's one of her friends or an escape method, which is usually then snatched away when she gets there, and then the exact same carrot is expected to function as the same incentive for the next leg of the plot too. It reminds me a lot of Batman Arkham City in that way. I didn't really share Lara's goals while playing, and that's obviously the first way to align a player with a character, to cause them to care about the same thing. On top of this, Lara is unacceptably thick-headed. The plot is so obvious so quickly that I completely took for granted what was happening. The ritual being completed to transfer the soul of the Sun Queen from body to body is glaringly predictable. This is not an issue in and of itself. Predictability is not gaming storytelling's first concern, and good games can still be predictable. A predictable storyline is not a problem if the story is told well. The problem is how long it takes Lara to figure it out and how that reflects on her character. Any kind of archaeological skills she may have or how brilliant a student she's supposed to be equates to a history degree. Her being this dumb makes her less interesting. This bleeds into Lara having very few actually admirable qualities as a character or any exceptional gifts as a person. I'm unsure what makes her a good protagonist? Really? Like, she's missing basic things? For example, I don't know what Lara is escaping the island to. I understand her investment in saving those who are on the island with her, but as far as motivation or character building, she is restricted to the island in more ways than one. I mean, give her a dog, a parent, a professor, a lover, and anything at all which is only hers and serves as an exact reason why she specifically wants to get home. She doesn't have the option of endearing herself to the audience through humor given the game's tone, and that's totally fine, but I don't think this could get much thinner. I must survive because I must doesn't do much to offset or explain just how far she's going to get this done. There's also an issue of status within her party. Obviously, Lara's journey goes from being the lowest status character to the highest, the leader, and you could argue this is achieved, but I think it could have been even more pronounced, and you could achieve this without killing so many characters. Lara being too afraid to speak within a group setting to begin with, and maybe it's made clear she's an introverted person who prefers to be alone, but the idea of being truly alone on the island is a different kind of terrifying. If she'd been somewhat sheepish in the story and the game, I think it would have lent more vulnerability to her and endeared the player to her a little bit. Furthermore, make her bad at something. Something she is not the best at in her group besides computers. Prove that Roth is her teacher for a reason. I can understand the game's reluctance to show her being outplayed, but that's kind of the point of the character's journey, to see her rise over obstacles she couldn't see herself defeating before. The idea of not doing this in the first place is highly questionable. I really think it would have gone a long way to play Lara as humble and riddled with actual tangible self-doubt and inexperience to begin with, rather than apprehension at performing tasks she is already capable of. It seems to be a question of will or moral objection to doing something rather than actually being able to pull it off, which I think was the wrong option to go with. Imagine if your skill tree didn't improve how quickly you can reload your bow, and instead there was a mechanic of panic or fear inflicted on Lara, which influences how well she can perform certain functions, such as reloading her bow. So to begin with, 1 out of every 3 times she goes to reload, she drops the arrow accidentally because she's scared, and the better you get at coping in that situation, the less often it happens. There's a prime example right here at the start of the game where Lara is crossing a branch across a waterfall, and the game does a pretty good job of putting the fear of falling into the player through the way this moment is shown. But instead of this being a scripted thing which is thrown out immediately, this could be a persistent effect applied to her abilities until such time as she can deal with heights. Instead of acquiring an ability to loot more ammunition from corpses, Lara could slowly become better and better at climbing different kinds of structures so as to avoid combat altogether and to find more collectibles inside more dangerous locations she didn't have the courage or ability to reach earlier. But instead of showing her self-doubt or inexperience through the game's tangible parts, we get scenes like this.
Look, Lara, we need to send out that SOS. And I'm not climbing anytime soon.
Yeah, I was afraid you were going to say that.
You can do it, Lara. After all, you're a Croft.
I don't think I'm that kind of Croft.
Sure you are. You just don't know it yet.
Lara Croft in her native habitat. She's on the hunt for the lost kingdom of Yamatai, home to the fabulous Himiko, mythical Sun Queen, and ancestor of yours truly.
Sam, this is serious.
Oh, sweetie, I know. I'm just trying to lighten the mood here. Everyone's so on edge. What are you so worried about?
I'm close to something. I'm sure of it. I just don't know if the others will listen. Or even if they should.
Lara, you know this stuff better than anyone. Seriously, I'm not just saying this to make you feel better. I trust you, Roth trusts you. You got this. Now let's take a break, okay?
Okay. And Sam, thanks.
If the themes of the story are not reflected in the game, two entire sets of people have not done their job: the designers and the writers. Furthermore, this kind of writing is a huge pet peeve of mine because of this magical thing called subtext. The best thing about video games for storytelling is that they're so able to use subtext embedded into the mechanics. This is something we did 20 years ago that we've somehow forgotten how to do. There is almost nothing that words can say within these instances that visuals cannot already do, are not already doing, and doing better. The only advantage in a video game such as this that words provide is specificity. This may not be something you want. When Tomb Raider suddenly remembers that it can use visual language to infer things, it goes right to 11, uses a pile of dismembered limbs to communicate danger. I mean, I guess that's subtle enough. The extremity of this environment is actually more likely to leave the player questioning why Lara is still alive if this is how everyone else ended up. I know that making games is expensive and throwing out design is a lot harder than throwing out writing, which is cheaper and easier to implement, but this kind of dialogue is not dialogue. It is an excuse for creating a poor narrative through the design in the first place. The purpose of the dialogue does not have to be restricted to setting up objectives or moving the plot or exposition. It exists as disguised reinforcement of themes which are already there, given appropriate twists depending on what each character ultimately represents and is there to do. This writing is trying to save the game from doing any actual work. Why bother telling a story with mechanics when you can cover your own ass by shoving subtext and story in there post-mortem with dialogue? It reads and sounds like the story was an afterthought, or at the absolute least was too proud of its narrative themes to give players the option of reading into the game and slowly extracting worth by instead placing it all at the surface level. I've seen this happen before, a lot more recently actually, except before it had a Viking paint job. Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice is in many ways a second example of how damaging this kind of writing can be. It creates a blanket of developer micromanagement which stops the player from actually getting the most out of the story because the characters won't stop telling the player exactly how to feel. There's no subtlety at all. Everyone says exactly what they mean and says everything they can, instead of inferring the feeling they're trying to get across and letting the player figure it out by having to be engaged in the themes and such. As a player, you don't have to read into the metaphors or the representation of characters very far at all. It's all as literal as it can possibly be. Basically, instead of letting the player discover, hey, Lara's pretty scared here and doesn't know if she can pull through, or gee, Senua's dad wasn't really a good bloke, the game says something aloud, not to the effect of that, but says exactly that. On the other side of the coin, I've also seen games that do this really, really well, as in have excellent writing which is subtle at the right points, builds characters with depth and progression and mechanical reinforcement for the narrative themes and everything, and absolutely none of these games receive the credit they deserve and are usually subject to the most surface level of readings. So maybe I should be praising Tomb Raider for putting its narrative themes in view, rather than putting them somewhere effective. Same thing, right? So one of the more significant issues I have with the game is an ever-present disregard for the concept of patience, a frustrating ignorance of the time needed to acquaint a player with the game. The game continually shoves extremes into its set pieces and scripting, but absolutely none of it gives itself the opportunity to matter, because there is never anything else. I didn't get used to the characters before they were thrown into this situation. I was introduced to an extreme world and figured there would be moments of levity. There aren't many, which makes these extreme moments impactless by a lack of contrast, and with a lack of stillness comes a lack of sincerity. The beginning of Rise of the Tomb Raider, the sequel, is actually the perfect example of this, and of how little Lara's supposed origin in the first game actually mattered at all. To begin the game, Lara is climbing a mountain with Jonah, someone from the first game. While climbing this mountain, the game completely jumps the shark on the spectacle already, going as far as the first game ever went straight away with a massive avalanche, hectic, dangerous climbing, and lots of concerned yelling. This doesn't really have the chance to contain impact because it's the very first thing the game does. It doesn't warm up or give the player any sense of what 0 feels like before it goes to 10. Furthermore, any ideas the first game ended with about Lara's newfound drive and ability are immediately forgotten because she isn't taking point here and Jonah is constantly worried about if she's doing okay. Again, it plays her as a victim. She appears incompetent because her partner doesn't trust her ability and she isn't the leader of the expedition. Immediately after this, the game moves backward 2 weeks to a city with Lara in civilian clothing. Now this is something the game sorely needs. A chance to allow the player to acclimate themselves with her and her life when she is not in danger, when she's just relaxing. There's no better way to give the player a point of contact than to place the character in an ordinary location or situation, which then slowly transforms into an extreme. Think the opening of The Last of Us. Instead, this is a cutscene where Lara devotes herself to her dead father's quest, a man we know nothing about. She's still in a rush, she's still melodramatic, and we still don't learn anything about her. I want to note something. Rise is much more heavily inspired by the Uncharted series than the first game appears to be. It's a lot cleaner, much more of the spick and span design that Uncharted boasts. It might get the points as entertainment as a result because it's being presented as such. And there's this thing that Naughty Dog, the developers of Uncharted, do and rely on where nearly every single character in their stories already knows each other. Go back and check. Nearly every friendly individual shown in a Naughty Dog game from the PlayStation 3 onward is connected to someone else in the story before the player is introduced to them. There are exceptions, of course, but it's very rare to find lone units. Uncharted 4 went to the extreme of giving Nathan a long-lost brother he never mentioned before, just so it could receive this advantage. If there is a disconnect between the characters, one of them's usually the villain, and even that is a choice we've seen changing in their more recent games to try and make their villains more identifiable. Just let the player look in on something that's already happening. If it feels like either character in a conversation could be the playable one, you're playing a Naughty Dog game. This extends to gameplay. It's rare for players to be alone in a Naughty Dog game because seeing this contrast and companionship is so important to who each character is. When you are alone in one of their games, that aloneness becomes a huge part of that gameplay section. It feels more dangerous, you feel more like that person. Naughty Dog also write dialogue very, very well, so exposition between these characters always has overtones of banter to make it seem less forced. They don't waste time. The emotional connection from the player is born from their feeling involved with the dynamic between two or more units, never a single line to a single character. Tomb Raider attempts this approach during cutscenes, clumsily, in both games, because the games love to tell and not show. Most characters only ever talk about Lara or compliment and reassure her. Every piece is geared toward her, which directs all of the player's attention toward her as well. This cutscene, with a chance to allow Lara to be, even for a moment, a normal woman in her hometown, undercuts that possibility and instead has her focus on a dead character. So every other piece directs the player's attention toward her and she directs her attention to someone else. This doesn't make sense. It's exactly the same problem the first game faced with its objectives. The game doesn't ever give the player something to care about. Immediately after this scene, still at the beginning of Rise of the Tomb Raider, there's another move to the outskirts of Syria. That's 3 distinct, different locations with a different character beside Lara within 20 minutes of the start of the game, which is already using every single trick it has to impress on a spectacle scale. 3 different locations within 20 minutes with close to no correlation to each other or the player, and it's already thrown out every chance for investment and impact that it might have had. It's like a bull trying to throw you off caring about it. True, this is the sequel, but this rapid movement is present within the first game also. You only get a CGI cutscene before Lara is assaulted and dragged into a murder cave. The very first thing you see in the gameplay is a desecrated corpse. Discussing Lara's character further, I might be stating the obvious here, but there is nothing wrong with giving your main character faults. Faults they themselves are aware of or others point out and exploit. There is storytelling opportunity in hubris. There is a great beauty in overcoming your fear or your arrogance or your stubbornness, all of which are traits Lara possesses. Her stubbornness is what got her into this situation. Her journey should naturally be to learn to cooperate with other people, not to double down on her initial instincts. These traits, however, are not played as flaws in her character as they could be. She is a perfect, beautiful queen who never did anything wrong and was always a victim, and the game will not stop telling you that. So to do a quick recap of everything I've talked about so far in regards to criticism, Lara's character during the story's most intense moments, and indeed their presence as plot moments in their entirety, all come back to the will to survive. At their core, they tell a compelling tale of Lara's drive to rescue her friends and to keep moving forward. Determination, devotion, bravery. Each of these moments makes sense in relation to each other as elaboration on this theme, and despite having few clear narrative or plot links between them, they consistently get the point across, on their own, you know? And if video games were written the way films are, this would give the piece the option of constantly being about survival, because it could always control the implication of an off-screen threat. But the game here has to convey that threat directly to the person in control, to apply sufficient pressure to Lara in that gameplay sphere to give her something to survive. It has to make the Lara of the story, this desperate survivor getting through by the skin of her teeth, come across at all times in order for the story's moments successfully tied to that theme on their own to work across the entire game. It does not do this. The gameplay spaces often feel very safe and the combat is lethargic. Lara is superhuman and the amount of people she kills as a result of combat is well documented in its ignorance of all but itself as a mechanic. Open grief in the side of murder, gain rewards for murder. It's the worst, and I'm not the first to talk about it. Importantly, however, as a result, these plot points to do with survival not only feel out of place and melodramatic, they, and in turn their larger themes, contribute very little to how the game actually feels to play, and are therefore ineffective. If you find this long-winded explanation unhelpful, here's what that all means. The game's story, delivery, and themes feel entirely forced, because it is disconnected from how the player may feel about what is happening through multiple avenues. What they've been hoping to achieve as Lara within the game is limp because the objectives are weak and the characters poorly written. What they see isn't shared by anyone in the world because the screen is trying so hard to be a screen, and therefore participating with the story in any manner except as an onlooker is incredibly difficult. What they may feel as a result of combat and progression through the game is most likely not a sense of being threatened, of needing to survive and to find something to keep them going. It is a growing sense of victory, indeed of progression and forward motion. The story, separate from the game, is trying very hard to get Lara's feeling of survival across on its own, but this goal is not shared and this feeling not conveyed by the game's actual design as soon as more than one thing is happening at a time. I am, while I play, so aware of the separation between myself and Lara Croft for these reasons, and yet I do not feel separate because of the movement, because of the gameplay. It's like my hands are working but my eyes aren't. I am receiving two kinds of information simultaneously. This is as close as I can come to explaining the war that happens in my head when I play Tomb Raider, as best I can describe it. The sheer confusion I feel playing, watching, listening to this cacophony of mindlessness. I despise the process of participating in the game as much as I loathe what I'm asked to participate in.
Did I convince you? Did I fool you? Did you nod your head in agreement or draft an angry comment? Scoff at me or dismiss me as an idiot? Did you watch this entire thing? Why did you do that? This is the least important or valuable thing you've ever done. Did I convince you that what I really cared about was the faults of the game? Was I distracting and my rage enough? Did my voice keep you company even as it read the most meaningless drivel you've ever heard? I made this video to answer a question. Why do I hate Tomb Raider? I said I would answer it in two ways. The first way took nearly 50 minutes. Did you feel enlightened by it?
The first way is a boy fucking pleading for someone to take him seriously. The first way is Amber Crystal for a poisonous state of mind exactly what you're hoping to gain from being talked at for over an hour by a man you do not know. I am a reflexive and inflammatory short circuit looking for people who will feel hurt by what I say, so I can uproot their body feel art they already enjoy. I am looking for personal lives and childish retorts to rise while reading and imagine their authors as lesser than me. I am unwilling to grant you the time of day. I am not here for you. I am materia embodied. I am poison for my own mind. I am a captured mode of insolence, attempting to boil down the work of those who are greater than I into mere sentences, and I cannot help it. I am going to self-destruct. I am myself and I am conscious of where I am minding, and you are listening. Why can't you believe in me? Why can't I make them listen?
So I just spent however long complaining about a video game. I've done this a lot. I do this through habit. It has become easier to criticize a video game than to enjoy one for me. Forgetting to judge what I'm participating in has become annoyingly rare. You probably already know this about me. But I've never made a video game, I never will. I have studied films and video games, but under no curriculum or supervision. I would call myself analytical, I would call myself sensitive. I have self-studied intensely, I'm very proficient at introspection, other stuff comes bundled with that. I have been told, and I do believe, that I am inquisitive and perceptive in unique ways when it comes to media, and I'm constantly trying to get better at it, and I believe that this means what I have to say could sometimes be of value to other people.
Pretentious fuck.
Primarily, however, I am always trying to further my own understanding of myself and my relationship and responses to art. So I can sit and throw stones all day of what sound like reasonable arguments at a 5-year-old video game as a layperson semi-posing as learned, but to me, this particular game always felt different. I am the least fair commentator on Tomb Raider that you may have ever heard. I have never felt as invested in trying to disparage a particular video game, ever. And it calls into question not the validity of my opinion to me, but the weight of it.
What weight? Who listens to you?
And with Tomb Raider, I feel like I'm having an argument with a person more than I am discussing a piece of art. If people have openly criticized this game on the web before, and they have, I've tried to steer away from repeating the common topics, I never felt they went far enough. I want the very memory of this game erased from the earth. I want more blood from it than it has to give. It is not a person, it is a static simulation. It has nothing to say. Its silence in the face of my rage is crushing. How can I feel so powerless when I've thought it through so hard?
Just let it be.
I don't feel like I can. I feel like I have to share it.
Why? So you can have your broken opinion validated? If you convince someone else, you'll convince yourself. You know, it doesn't work like that.
I know that.
Don't you ever get tired? Don't you remember you spent years working on learning when to stop talking?
You're not even really that good at this. I can throw stones to try and make myself feel better, to try and rationalize an emotional reaction, but that's all I can do. Try. It means nothing. I've been able to say these things about this particular game for many years. I've sat on them just as long because it never seemed good enough. It never seemed to explain much at all. There's still something irrational about the conclusion I've arrived at with this game. The way I feel playing Tomb Raider is like the feeling I get in times of sudden great stress while having a fight with a friend, for example, while risking something, while in fight or flight. Playing Tomb Raider makes me actually, properly anxious, and I can't say this for certain, but I don't remember ever feeling anxiety before I played Tomb Raider. Now, I'm not about to go blaming my mental illnesses on a game, but something about playing this particular title at the particular time I did must have synced up, like I had a particularly vulnerable state of mind at the time that this title was not appropriate salve for. And I've been in the reverse situation, playing the right game at the right time, so I'm not sure the opposite is impossible. To be honest, I played Dragon Age Inquisition during a period of months at the end of high school where I felt very lost. It helped, I think, more than any other game would have to get me by during a really bad time. It is, for all its many faults, the most precious video game I own. To this day, it is a self-care pit stop for me. I'm sure you have a similar relationship with a particular game yourself, one that you remember so clearly that your exterior life while you played it has all but disappeared, as if the experience of playing that game was not something you did while living. It was its own lived experience unto itself. This is the absolute zenith of video games experiences to me, to supersede reality in my memory. A second life. I played Tomb Raider much earlier. I was still very impressionable and relatively unexposed to violent media, but I was trying to catch up with new games experiences as they were releasing, to get on the train. Tomb Raider was right up my alley, a fresh and exciting third-person action RPG with stealth and climbing. These elements were similar to other games I had played and enjoyed. I was recommended the game by friends and the reviewers I trusted at the time. So I bought it, and I was playing it, and I was loving it, enamored by the visuals and the style of it. I was connecting with it much more strongly than Uncharted, a series I greatly disliked at the time. I was really enjoying myself. In every sense, I loved the game. Then I was surprised by a single element introduced late into the game. I felt betrayed and cut and confused. This was conflict I had never felt before. The exact moment for me is still extremely vivid. Despite my shock, I attempted to deal with it and continue playing. There was an even more extreme showcase of this element soon after, and then another iteration again. And I reasoned that if I was having to put the controller down just to put my head in my hands, I should probably stop. This infuriated me. I turned on the rest of the game, I gave away my copy, something I've never done since, and didn't touch the game again until a few months ago. And the moment is so simple, and I hate that it's so simple. I hate that I can't make it sound grand, that I can't communicate it to someone else so they can understand it, and hate the game as much as I do for exactly the same reason. Because I'm not just analytical, I want people to agree with me. I want to feel less alone in this. And I hate that it doesn't explain anything that's wrong with the game. It's not something I can really blame it for. It explains something that's wrong with me. And I liken that mixture of anger and loneliness to standing in this hallway. A pit of hell in the middle of a city that I love. A barrage of well-made but aggressive and disconnected advertisements attacking my periphery until I break out into the light of the escalator just trying to get away. But why do I hate these ads and posters? Is it because of some grand pursuit of mine against the media and against the volume of advertising flooding my everyday, and my view of this particular space epitomizing everything I find so abrasive about doctored, targeted advertising? Is it that noble? Maybe not. Maybe it's because I'm, and always have been, extremely insecure about the way that I look. Maybe I'm preoccupied with how I seem to be to other people, whether I'm attractive or not, whether I'm worth a lingering look. Maybe I hate these models on these posters because I'm so deeply, unshakably, torturously jealous of what they represent that even while I am aware of the irreality of it, I cannot help but stare at myself and hate. I hate this hallway because of how it makes me feel. It makes me look inward at something that makes me nervous, at something I don't like about me. And I don't dislike Tomb Raider this fiercely because it's a bad game, because its presentation splits the player from the game, because it's badly written, not because its gameplay fails to convey the themes of the story, not because of its inconsistent narrative goals, not for any excuse you might ordinarily find. I don't disagree with any of this, and all of them are reasons I would put forth to argue the game is not worth your time, but none of them are reasons why I feel this strongly. I dislike it because of the way it makes me feel. It makes me feel anxious and scared and panicked and furious and small because Lara is required to begin using incendiary weapons toward the end of the game. And I happen to be so afraid of fire that I can barely look at it. That is really, completely, all the reason there is. The only reason I want to scream at this game and everyone who made it until my throat bleeds is because I am so scared of fire and burning, and I did not know that until I played this game. Because it came out of nowhere, because there isn't an option in-game not to do it, because I was already enjoying the game before this happened. All I can do is sit and ask, beg for answers why. Why is this game this violent, and why does this violence make me feel so sick? It does not need to burn people to tell this story, so why is there so much fire? Now the tone is what made this possible. The tone of the game had sucked me in, and while I hadn't been impressed by the narrative, I had still felt fully involved and encompassed by the game because of the extremity of it. It was dirty and bloody and unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Its regular combat had my hair stand up on end. It was visceral but exciting. This was exactly the forbidden fruit I'd been restrained from eating until I was the legal age to play adult games. Imagine my discomfort, imagine the taste of the bile when I realized I'd gone too far, when I didn't recognize any area around me that felt safe. I had no idea that excitement wasn't something to chase, it was warning. Warning that maybe just because it's new and bloody and adult doesn't make it real, or proper, or good, or fascinating, it makes it easy. And by the time I realized that fire exactly was something I had become very, very scared of, something that even when just in a virtual world made me feel unsafe and afraid, my admiration for the game wore itself into unrestrained disdain. If it had been using the violence and the fire for a reason, for a narrative purpose, this would have been different. It would have been Spec Ops: The Line, and it would have known what it was doing. Discomfort weaponized and directed against the player themselves for a reason which, when playing Tomb Raider, was front and center in my mind. Burning people doesn't make me feel like a hero. Fire makes me feel like a tormentor, like a body made of hate. But it kept calling me victim. It kept calling me hero. And the fire was just for flavor, for the metaphor of destruction and rebuilding oneself, if you want to give it credit that I'm mentally unable to take seriously. Don't use violence in your game for no reason. There is nothing cheaper or easier in storytelling. The only other time a game made me feel a little bit like this was Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, another video game I've critiqued on my channel. Perhaps it's why I see both games as extraordinarily similar in many ways. Now, I consider that critique to be some of the most exhaustive work I've seen done into that particular title, and I'll stand by it, but someone must have noticed that I barely showed any footage of the fire part of the game. I barely showed any footage of it because I was trying so hard not to look at the screen while playing, was consciously not recording because I didn't want to accidentally see something later while editing, was having to periodically walk away from the game frequently, and was by the end of it hyperventilating and crying at the same time. There are sections of my own videos that I myself cannot watch because of this. I often wonder if having used this footage is a moral compromise, if it makes me a worse person. How can I blame anyone for doing it? It's effective. Would I do any different? Obviously not. I tried to keep those clips as short and non-explicit as possible, but still. The only reason I finished the game was because by then, I was absolutely determined to make a video about it, disparaging every single thing I could find. I needed justice for something I felt done to me. By the end of that section, I would never have admitted it. I was already out for blood. I was on a journey that would end up taking me 3 months to try and rationalize my hatred of a game for any reason but the most important one, that it terrified me for a reason I hate that I cannot explain, that it seemed to think it was better than me because I was so easy to make quake. Is it natural to hate your own weakness that much? And even though I may look away, I've always been sure that in many ways, my aversion to fire is an admission of its effect. By covering my eyes, by cowering, I'm saying that it affects me. It is above me in that sense. If I was a real man, I'd stare. If I was a real man, I wouldn't be running away from this. It was this desire to try and stare down my fear which saw me return to Tomb Raider last year. I wanted it to know it was not better than me. It wasn't worth it at all. It is not a living thing. It cannot learn something. Ironically, the iciness of my finally finishing this game for the first time after it had caused me such confusion and grief left me more dissatisfied than ever. But what right does Tomb Raider have to the darkest part of me when everything that makes it what it is cheap and poor? Why, if I hate this, does it still affect me? How, if I can say aloud why it is as art a failure, can it still hold something over my head? I feel so easy to conquer and I cannot help but hate that about myself. But emotions are not pure, they are not amoral or vague. Maybe I didn't like the game because I didn't want to. I'll never really know. I'll get confused about it. On one hand, I am sure that I have a degree of power over the games I play, and there is an element of total agency I can exhibit. I can turn it off. But I don't know the content of the game before I play it. I don't know where it's going to go or how that will affect me. Only the developers know that. Only the developers know the potential power of their own work, of the pieces they choose to place in it. And I, in turn, place faith in them to take me to places that I feel prepared to go. I was not ready for this particular one, and I think that's all there really is to it. And I may hate that, but Tomb Raider wasn't meant to make me feel like this. It wasn't designed to hurt, it was designed to entertain. And the form that intention took just happened to contort to me into a very difficult experience that I could not for years complete or confront. I watched the credits roll and I know that no harm was meant, and for most people, no harm will be felt. But this knowledge does not help me. It continues to hurt all the same. It is beyond reason for me to say that my having played Tomb Raider causes me to hate myself, but it does. There is no game I have played in my life that I hate as much as this one, because there is no person in this world that I hate as much as myself. And playing Tomb Raider was the first time I knew that. It is not possible for me to disentangle the game and its faults or merits from that enlightenment. But I need to remind myself that I'm just a single customer, just a single player. And in the grand scheme of things, how I felt after I purchased the game doesn't matter in the slightest to any part of this process. And what I say about the game after the fact will not change a thing. I am aware that my experience of Tomb Raider, no matter how important or life-changing or haunting it was, doesn't mean a thing to anyone but me. And I think that is what hurts the most.
Tight ends, they're